getting into our first segment of the day, we're going to be talking about the Final Four. Now, again, fixating on the men's side of this. If we have some time, though, we will dive into the women's game a little bit as well. If any of our live viewers have questions, definitely drop them in the chat. But the Final Four on the men's side is tipping off in Phoenix, Arizona on Saturday night. And the teams just traveled out there. We already have a little bit of a subplot, a minor story that has come out with the reigning national champions in UConn by the fact that their flight was originally scheduled to head out on Wednesday night, but because of some malfunctions with the plane itself, they were delayed 7.5 hours, so they ended up not arriving in Arizona until much later than they were initially planning for. They ended up landing yesterday morning at 3:14 local time. To them coming from the East Coast, felt like 5:14 body time. So definitely an inconvenience. Shouldn't have any effect on Saturday's game, of course. Now they have all these types of media availabilities and such that they have to put up with over the next couple days, but ultimately I don't think that it is going to have any sort of a real effect on their tournament game itself, other than the fact that if you keep up with college basketball and you know anything about UConn's head coach, Dan Hurley, this is going to be yet another thing that he sort of spins in the us versus the world commentary that time and time again, he has almost the Michael Jordan mindset of just internalizing any type of obstacle, inconvenience, and using it as motivation. Was very vocal about that when the brackets were released a few weeks ago, when he saw the type of region that UConn was slated into, which in his defense was definitely the toughest of the bunch, did not stop UConn from dominating their way into the Final Four to get where they are. Also, sort of as we're talking about Dan Hurley here and his internalization of these types of different factors, it was just announced within the past half hour that Houston's Kelvin Sampson was named the AP Coach of the Year, beat out Dan Hurley by 2 votes. I'm sure for Hurley, ultimately, I think he cares much, much more about winning the national championship than he has care for this Coach of the Year award. But again, just knowing the type of personality he is, I don't want to call it pettiness because I don't think that that's necessarily it. I just feel like it's having that chip on your shoulder, the little bit of the edge that just separates the ultra competitors from anybody else. And that's what we've seen from Dan Hurley over his early tenure here in UConn. And even if you go back and hear some of the stories from his pre-UConn days, seems like that is the type of man that he is. But, just wanted to briefly address that at least. But as for the matchups themselves, we have Alabama versus UConn and NC State versus Purdue. Before we get into predictions on those games, there were a couple other things I just sort of wanted to run through. And in this new age of name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal, all this player movement, you can call it player empowerment if you'd like in the college game, I found it very interesting that I looked at a ranking that CBS Sports put out in terms of ranking the starters of each of the Final Four teams, and what stuck out to me was the fact that 12 out of 20 of the starters in the Final Four are transfers, including 6 of the top 10 players that were ranked in this CBS list. Out of this group, it was notable that Purdue is the most homegrown program left. 4 out of their 5 starters were initially recruited to Purdue. Lance Jones is the only transfer in their starting lineup. And then if you want to look on the other side of the spectrum, I believe every single NC State starter is a transfer at some point. Fact check me if I'm wrong on that, but both of the DJs are. Mohamed Diarra is for sure. And then it comes down to the others in McConnell, but I'm pretty sure that every single one of them is a transfer, which, is just something very notable in my eyes when you look at sort of what it takes to be a dominant program and, even dominant, just to be a relevant program in today's college sports world. Really, this stretches not just basketball, but football as well. A lot of people point to the fact that if you want to make that sort of cross-sport reference, in that Clemson has sort of seen the level of success deteriorate over the past few years, and in large part it's due to the fact that Dabo Swinney is, not very... He doesn't really utilize the transfer portal like some of these other major programs do. He believes more so in the homegrown talent there. And again, you can debate it all you'd like. I'm just saying the results would tell you, as of late at least, that you do have to sort of take advantage of this transfer portal. And that's what the teams that have made it to this point have done so far. But one other quick trend that I wanted to hit on is, out of the 20 starters from the Final Four, only one of them is a freshman. This is something that I wouldn't say is necessarily a recent trend per se. We've known that a lot of the time, especially in the past decade or so, that it's really hard to strictly ride freshman talent all the way through this tournament where it's the biggest possible stage. And a lot of the time you need more experience to help be, the real catalyst of your postseason run. And that is also something that sort of stuck out to me when looking at the teams remaining. Stephon Castle being the only freshman starter left in the big dance. He, of course, the guard from UConn. He's had his ups and downs this season. The talent's clearly there, but he was a 5-star guy coming into college, and to some degree he's lived up to that level of expectations. Again, inconsistencies have been a little bit detrimental at times, but who am I to say detrimental, because UConn has been the most dominant team in the country this season. So, just some things that I thought were notable when looking at the overall pool that is remaining. And then I also just wanted to sort of look at the 4 teams remaining and look at what is the biggest individual team's storyline. And I do think it has to be Purdue and their redemption arc here. They were, of course, upset by Fairleigh Dickinson, the 16-seeded team that took them down in the round of 64 last year. It was Purdue's 3rd straight loss to a double-digit seeded team. They had been upset in the round of 64 2 of the last 3 years, and now they are back to the Final Four for the program's first time since 1980. They have, technically unofficial, but they are going to have the 2-time Naismith Player of the Year award winner in Zach Edey. He's just about a lock to get it this upcoming year as well. He's the reigning Naismith Player of the Year as well. So this turnaround here for Matt Painter and the Boilermakers to get back to this spot, everybody, including myself, I didn't think that they were necessarily, round 1 eligible to be upset, but I didn't have necessarily the confidence levels that I did in UConn or Houston for that matter. And here they are in this position while Houston is at home. Just saying, Jamal Shead never got injured. Maybe a different story for the Cougars, but that is not the point. I think that you look at Purdue here and you have to give them tons of credit for being able to make it back to this spot. We heard Zach Edey talking about how there isn't a level of pressure or anything, but it was clear there was real pressure on Matt Painter, on Edey to be able to pull this off. I mean, you think Edey's going to be headed to the NBA. Painter's going to be able to stick around in college basketball for a while still. obviously without Edey, the level of success may dip a little bit, but Edey may have been one of the most sort of forgotten great college basketball talents if they were never able to put together a real run. The furthest they had made it up to this point in Edey's career had been the Sweet 16 when they lost to St. Peter's. So this is definitely a big deal for him. For whatever you want to talk about legacy, I know that sometimes that conversation can be quite the headache, but really helped to solidify the collegiate career of Zach Edey, and how, in this time, like I just talked about in terms of transfers and the lack of real consistency in terms of where players are, which also sort of leads to the lack of star power. You look at the women's game, and there are a lot more notable, homegrown talents and a lot of bigger names. The men's side doesn't necessarily have that same level of marketability with their stars because they don't have the star power the same way. And Zach Edey, I know that he's not super outspoken. He doesn't play necessarily the flashiest game or anything, but he is an incredible player. It goes beyond just being how tall he is. He is legitimately skilled, especially on that offensive side of the ball. What he'll pan out to be in the NBA is definitely a little bit of an uncertainty, but for his college career, he really is one of the most notable big men of, I'm going to say, at least recent history. But if I have to go into a deep dive and sort of look at the big picture, I'm sure you can make a larger point for him as well. And he did it by sticking with the program in Purdue that, it seemed like things were getting tough at multiple points with some of these upsetting losses, but he stuck with it, and now it's paying off with them being in the Final Four, so you have to give him credit for that, and Matt Painter as well for being able to not just retain him, but it's the others on the team as well, and maybe some of the younger guys, but Fletcher Lawyer, Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman-Renn, all younger players that didn't get discouraged after frankly, an embarrassing loss last year to Fairleigh Dickinson in the tournament. And now they're all back. They're better players than they were last year. And they have real potential to make the finals and win it all. So on that note, sort of giving out some picks here, I do want to look at the spreads actually as I speak this over, because just getting ahead of it, I'm going to be taking UConn and Purdue this weekend. Now, I think that it would be arrogant to say there's no chance that we could see upsets on either end. As much as I just spoke up Purdue, if I were going to pick an upset, it would be NC State over Purdue. I mean, the big man matchup, of course, between Zach Edey and DJ Burns is going to be the big time headlines and everything along those lines, but the rest of the guards for NC State as well, I do believe are very talented players in having the likes of DJ Horn and Michael O'Connell, that have been the level of players that they have. O'Connell, I don't know where I just got McConnell, but I think that could be a solid matchup. That being said, the spread as it currently stands on ESPN Bet is 9.5. UConn is 11.5. So I think I would probably side with both of the favorites in terms of the spreads here. Again, NC State, if they made things close, I wouldn't be surprised. But you look at, the fact that Purdue was tested as much as they were against a team like Tennessee last week, and they ended up winning that game by 6. It was by far the closest game they've played in some time here since the Big Ten tournament, at least when they ended up losing. But Tennessee is a much better team than NC State in my eyes. As much as I love NC State, go Wolfpack. I'm sure that a lot of America is rooting for them in this upcoming game. Fact of the matter is, we do have to remember that this is not an NC State team that was going to even make the tournament. And I'm sure remember it. Everybody's been talking about the fact that NC State was not going to make the tournament if it weren't for that miraculous run that they pulled off in the ACC tournament. But Purdue, I think, is just on another level, and I think they're on that same level with UConn, where, I guess sort of shifting into that game quickly, I've been picking against Alabama for most of the tournament. I believe I ended up, on the show at least, picking them over Clemson, but just about outside of that, I said that they were in potential danger in just about every game, and they've continued to prove me wrong up to this point. That offense is absolutely lethal, and you have to give them, their flowers for being able to rely so heavily on that offense and just game after game being elite. Not just that, but other than the Grand Canyon game that they played, be able to sort of drag others into this fast-paced three-point shootout game. I think that UConn is too well coached, too disciplined, and too good on both sides of the floor to, really let Alabama dictate this game. Now we'll see. I've been wrong about Alabama just about all tournament, so maybe I'm going to be wrong in this instance as well. But spread is 11.5. I do think that they cover that. Going back to last tournament, they haven't lost a game. They haven't won a game by less than 13 points. So when you look at it from that perspective, that alone would say that UConn should be favored by a little bit more than 11.5. But we will see. And then whatever our finals matchup is, or our championship game matchup, I should say, is on Monday. We will dive more into that in depth on our show on Monday. But I think that Purdue versus UConn could be absolute cinema. Just about anything that we could have asked for in terms of being college basketball fans, and seeing that matchup. Would be another great matchup between Klingon and Zach Edey in terms of another great big man matchup. I mean, if Purdue were to move on to play Alabama, I think there's a 0% chance they would be able to stop Zach Edey, and that would be a stomping. But UConn-Purdue would be a fascinating matchup. Again, it's been the two of them, along with Houston as well, all season long, and to have them be here in the biggest possible stage would be a gift to college basketball fans. So, hope everybody enjoys those games. If you're betting on the games, hope your bets hit. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the news about Bronny James. So stick with us, and we will be right back.